Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Park Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation.
Coming up on To the Contrary.
They already have that fire in their belly to accomplish something, to make change, but they don't yet see the connection to elected roles and what they can do in changing, changing the world for the better.
Hello, I'm Bonnie Bay. Welcome to the Contrary, a weekly discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Despite progress, women remain underrepresented in U.S. politics and often encounter substantial challenges as candidates. One organization that seeks to change that is She Should Run. Today, we're joined by Erin Loos Cutraro, the CEO and founder of the nonpartisan organization She Should Run, has one clear mission: to encourage and support women from diverse backgrounds to consider careers in public office. Thank you for joining us, Erin. How are you?
I'm doing great, Bonnie.
And how is She Should Run doing? Tell us first, how long ago did you found it and what kind of progress can you claim? Because the last 3 decades have been times of great change for women in politics.
No doubt. So She Should Run actually has been doing this work for over a decade. We got our start. We were actually a project within another organization that was a 501c4 and a PAC. And what I found is that there was no single entity focused on finding the women who aren't already thinking about running for office. And so in many ways, we know when women run, this is still true today, by the way, when women run, they win at the same rate as men, but there aren't enough women actually running ultimately and then on the ballot. And so that is the work of She Should Run, is finding and targeting women who aren't already thinking about it and meeting them with really, really accessible first step resources.
And how do you think, tell me about how you've closed the gap between men's and women's representation in everything from local to national politics since you started the organization. Of course, there are several organizations working on this issue.
That's right.
But if you can zero it down to some places anywhere where you had the greatest impact, that would be interesting to know.
Yeah, of course. And I think it is important always to kind of make folks know that there is a robust ecosystem that exists to support women running. Much of the work, the vast majority of work that people know, is the work of supporting women who have already made the decision to run. So this is where you see political action committees giving money, a lot of the kind of traditional candidate training programs, how to run a media plan, how to, do a get out the vote effort. All of those incredibly important efforts, and generally partisan efforts, because they're generally tied to political party, happen once a woman has already made the decision to run. The work of She Should Run is actually really non-traditional in that, we are, through partnerships, through national awareness campaigns, we make the case for women's representation at all levels, primarily at the local level, because we know that's often where women are taking their very first steps. Doesn't mean we would discourage women from running for federal office. But this reality that the majority of women who are, just coming to that starting line for the first time are often doing it in local office. And the vast majority of opportunities in elected office in this country are at the local.
You tend to work more on local races than national or statewide races?
Yeah, and I can give you an example because it might be really helpful to kind of hear the type of women that we're often engaging with. So, because we are working, it's a a fun problem to have to solve, which is how do you find women who aren't looking for you, which is the mission of She Should Run. We're trying to find those women who are outside the echo chamber, who are making change in their community, who have issues that are impacting them, who are not thinking about their potential in elected office. And so the tools to do that, and this is really led by research, are, women are most often motivated by people in their personal network. So it's like that peer-to-peer encouragement, or by political gatekeepers, the influence they have over a woman's ultimate decision, and even influence to think about running for office is large. So, in the case of She Should Run, we are often connecting the dots between issues that women are talking about and what that looks like if this is an issue in your local community or an issue at the state level, what that actually looks like in elected office. So what are the policies that you could make a difference in? So it is sort of lighting that spark. So I'll give you an example, which is, we had an incredible young woman who actually serves on She Should Run's community council right now, advising us on our program development. She came to us because she had a traumatic experience, which was young classroom teacher's aide, was in a classroom when a child shot a gun. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but for all of the obvious reasons, this was very traumatic for her, for everyone in the classroom. She, prior to this, was somebody who was incredibly involved, volunteering in her community, but she just felt sort of lost, not sure where to go. She had a friend who knew that She Should Run was we hosted a series of webinars on issues that women are talking about, like gun violence prevention, and then brought to the table local elected officials to talk about the roles that they're playing to, make change for better in their communities. So it happened to be in this case that a friend of this young woman's name's Eileen, encouraged her to attend. And, it was the thing that unstuck Eileen from this like very, understandable sort of paralysis that she was in. She came, she heard local officials talk about what they could accomplish. She then went on, not everybody has this immediate of a response, but she created a task committee in her community to address that issue of gun violence prevention, as well as other issues. And I think that's often what it is. It's what we see with women that we're coming to. They're already doing things. They already have that fire in their belly to accomplish something, to make change, but they don't yet see the connection to elected roles and what they can do in changing the world for the better through policy making. And so that's the spark that She Should Run provides and really makes the connection on.
And what did she run for, and did she win?
So she's still preparing. So this is another myth about what it takes to make a candidate. So we find so we've been doing this work for a while, so we've been able to see it. It takes somewhere between 4 and 7 years often from the point where a woman is actually thinking about running to the point where she's on the ballot. Now, it is not always true. There are some women who will wake up and just know they're going to do it, and they put themselves on the ballot. Immediately they're recruited. There is a opportunity right in front of them, but that's rare. That's not how it normally happens. How it normally happens is someone gets a little bit more involved in their community. They're seen as a change maker. They're then encouraged to run. They then are looking for which office they're going to run for. These things take time. So in Eileen's case, she started this task force. She's already been tapped for, she's in Southern California. She's already been tapped for a couple other leadership opportunities and is preparing for a run that has not happened yet.
Tell me about the inequalities. Certainly in Congress, we know it's nowhere near 50-50, but where is it?
All levels of office, we're sitting at or below 30% of elected roles. And this is even less so in terms of representation of women from marginalized communities. So we know it's even more challenging, for women of color across the board to get in, especially to the highest levels of office. And I always pause because it sounds daunting, this reality that women are 51% of the population. We're still representing this small sliver of elected roles. still, we've come a long way. We've come a long way in, women taking these seats of power, changing the way that policy is being made. It's just that change is not happening as fast as some of us would like to see.
This show has been on the air for 33 years, and I covered women's issues before that. And everybody thought that within a few years after the second wave feminism came through, and even third wave feminism, that there would be more women involved in politics, and it just didn't work that way. Women, I don't know if women have more of an aversion to fundraising than men, because that's the most important part, I think, of running for office is asking people to support you personally. It's not just your nonprofit organization, it's
That's
you
right.
personally, or maybe you and your party.
Yeah.
But men seem to have no problem. They knock on 100 doors and 99 get slammed in their face, and they don't care.
Yeah.
They go on to the 100th and find the big injection of money, whereas women get depressed after the first 10
That's
doors.
right. I mean, it is a different experience. The good news is women are raising just as much money as men. They're just often having to work a lot harder for it, because that, traditional boys club network is being built for women in a system that was built for men. So, it's sometimes a harder uphill climb. Women get there, they get it done, but it is most definitely a barrier. And I will say, over the course of time, the barriers have shifted too. So where, money may have been the number one barrier before, one of the barriers that we see rising to the top now is just the toxicity of, and frankly, like real threats that exist for women when they put themselves out there to run for leadership roles, and in the case of our work in elected leadership roles, this reality that the system itself is sort of it's rigged against women. You've got incumbency. It's a little in the weeds, but this reality that I think the stat is like 90% of elected roles in this country are occupied by incumbents, and it is around that same percent of individuals who win. So in a race against an incumbent, 9 out of 10 times the incumbent's going to win. So it's really difficult to break that mold. And not everyone, not every woman, deserving woman, is able to do so. But it is in some ways a little bit of a numbers game, in addition to, we have to tackle the system that's keeping women out at the same time.
But how has the internet, if at all, changed fundraising for women candidates? Has that leveled the field at all?
The playing field has leveled more for women, but what we see the issue with is less about individual donors and that access, because women can connect really well. The small dollar fundraising. I know I was just looking at a report about, the success that women have across the board, but women, and especially women from marginalized communities, really fall behind when it comes to institutional support. So the big PAC dollars are still, and again, this is the system, is they're going to the incumbents, and the incumbents are largely white males. And so breaking that system, requires sort of a dismantling of a little bit of everything. So I would say we're moving in a positive direction. The more that we can get individuals involved, small dollar donations go a really long way when you can build the mass. That is no small effort.
So women are, generally speaking, more likely to be gun averse, although the gun lobby has done, unfortunately, a pretty good job of luring more women into hunting and those sorts of things. But so what other issues? Obviously choice.
Yes.
I would think gun control, but you tell me from where you sit.
We did a really interesting research study looking at the motivators that help women connect the dots to running for office. So it was basically, we know the reasons that women who have already made the decision why they're running, but it's a whole different landscape when you're talking to women who are not thinking about running and what would actually motivate them. And so it's two areas. One area is they're already involved in community service. They see it as a logical next step. Another area is issues. So, women aren't monolithic, of course. There's no one issue that motivates all women. But what we did is we partnered with YWCA and UN Women on research they had done to really, get into what are the issues that matter most. And so, that was everything from, of course, reproductive health to the economy. I mean, pretty much all of the issues you can think of. So climate, racism, and gun violence, and just violence prevention, period. Gun violence is obviously something that, is a major piece of what we're talking about when it comes to violence against women and just violence overall. But, for us, there's no one issue that's gonna sort of pop for every woman, but it is interesting to see the overlap with what polling is saying now around this election cycle. Obviously, the economy rising to the top there, reproductive health rising to the top, thanks, especially to Supreme Court and, the current deliberation there is going to remain top of mind, I think, for women. So, I think we will continue to see women stepping forward. I did want to, you mentioned the sort of energy in the past and how it feels like that's sort of waned. And what's interesting to me is we have had a couple of moments in time over history where you feel like, okay, this is it. This is the moment when we're finally going to tip the scale and the floodgates are going to open and there's no looking back. And most recently, I would say that was coming out of the 2016 election. We definitely saw it in the surge of women candidates stepping up, primarily Democratic women, but also Republican women in that case. And it was most definitely a surge period in the, election cycle immediately following that election and even the one that followed that. And I say now, because I'm taking a cue from our great friends at Center for American Women in Politics who track these numbers very closely. And one of their scholars described it as if you picture like all the apple trees being shaken after that election cycle, it was essentially everyone who had been thinking about or who were primed to run for office stepped up and did so or took action right after in that moment. And in many ways, we see.
Well, and I think of, let me just interrupt you for a second, because I remember being at the Democratic convention in 1992, the year of the woman.
Year of the woman.
So it goes back a lot
That's
farther
right.
than that. And of course, there were efforts ever since, the 19th Amendment and women got the right to vote on a national scale that people have thought, oh, we're finally going to do it. We're finally going to be equal.
The reality is this work is hard and it doesn't happen overnight. And even with these really promising moments where you see so many women step up and we have these, these bumps in representation, we're still not there. And we can't stop doing the work. The work feels harder sometimes. I would say we're in one of those periods right now. It feels harder. And the reality is, if you just look back in time at how much has gone into getting us to where we are today, we have no choice but to continue pushing forward.
What about the advent of uber conservative women, not just conservative women, but uber conservative women getting into politics and getting a lot of power, especially in these Trump years? I think of Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia. I think of Christine Noem from South Dakota, who bragged about shooting and killing her puppy. What has that done to women's participation in politics?
Well, I'll tell you what, it has definitely been a challenge for any sort of sweeping message around the need for more women in office, because we see it as a nonpartisan organization who, by the way, cares deeply about seeing women on both sides of the aisle, that when you have examples of women who are in, tremendous positions of power, who are actively rejecting a message around advancing women, or who are actively saying they do not want to work with any sort of gender equity initiatives. Our response to that has to be, as with all things, you have to, which is challenging. I'm going to name it as challenging and say what I think is necessary. What is challenging is they have, I feel like, an outsized voice. They represent a very small percentage of the population, but a very present voice. And so it is okay to say that women are not monolithic and that there is going to be a small percentage of women, in any case when you're trying to level the playing field, who rise to positions of power. They are not the overwhelming voice. They are not the overwhelming majority. And in fact, we do find that the majority of women on both sides of the aisle that step up are willing, in their own ways, and this may look differently in a conservative district, but to make a case for women. And we need women on both sides of the aisle doing that. And we need to, at the same time, acknowledge that there are going to be some who are actively working against us. And that cannot stop us. It can't slow us. It has to energize us to continue moving forward. We acknowledge it and we move forward.
What about, you're talking about integrating extreme right-wing women into the message that you're trying to send out. What about diverse women?
Yes.
How are they doing compared to white women and compared to men?
The barriers for women of color across the board are much greater. So that's in everything from being less likely to be encouraged to run, not seeing themselves represented, therefore questioning their own qualifications. Should they be one of the magical few who make it through, less likely to get the institutional support? And yet we still see incredible examples of women making it forward, bringing their own personal experiences, often challenged for being just a nurse or just a teacher or just a mother who is mourning the death of her son, serving in office. And it's in those just a moments that I get really great energy, by the way, because it's the voice that you need in elected offices, people with real, closest to the communities that they serve. But we have to do everything in our power to ensure they can get there, just to acknowledge the road is harder, and build the pathways for it to be easier. We have to build for a better future. I mean, truly, we're not going backwards in the increased diversity in this country. She should run. Because we do this very early pipeline building, we actually track our data toward the census data that we see coming for 2060. Because we know if we're building, it takes women so many years to sort of get in position to run, that we have to be looking around the corner. And that around the corner is a beautifully diverse country that we want to see fully represented in elected office.
And where would you say they are making the most progress? Are they still, I covered Congress in the late 80s, early 90s, and women were making a ton, and it's particularly women of color, were making tremendous progress. Is that still the case? And in that time, obviously, we had a female speaker for two different sets of years, but Pelosi was speaker for a long time, and she was very big on raising money for women and women of color to join her in the House and in the Senate. Did it work?
Yes, it worked. And yes, the problem isn't solved. So both are true. We if you look at the trend lines, which is what you have to pay attention to, we are ticking in the right direction. That said, we're still in a position where, depending on which sort of data source you're looking at, we're well over 100 years away from seeing parity in elected office. If I look at sort of the landscape of where a lot of the work is happening right now, I mean, I know there's a lot more and essential work happening at the state legislative level, as we're seeing, a lot of a lot of legislation that that frankly is very harmful to women being moved forward with the lack, directly tied to the lack of representation of women. So I have great optimism in the work that I'm seeing happen down ticket. And I think that's true, of course, for all levels of office. We want to see there's over 500,000 elected offices in this country, and 99% of them at the local level. Most people don't realize that. And a lot of these things are, legislating things that are happening in your backyard. And we need women in all of those spaces and places. And I think I'm hopeful to see a lot of efforts focused on state legislature, on mayors. We're pulling that down ticket because I think it will have a direct effect on what we actually see at the federal level as well.
And let's look forward to a rosy future with more women and women of color in office in both parties. And thank you for joining us, Erin Loos Cutraro, CEO and founder of She Should Run. That's it for this edition. Keep the conversation going on all our social media platforms and visit our website, pbs.org/to the contrary. Whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next time.
Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Park Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation.
For a transcript or to see an online version of this episode of To the Contrary, please visit our PBS website at pbs.org/to the contrary.
You're watching PBS.